He was moments away from sealing a multi-million-dollar deal in the heart of Chicago, flanked by polished attorneys and executives in suits worth more than most people's cars. But no one in that glass-walled room expected the only person who actually read the fine print to be a barefoot 9-year-old girl standing beside a rattling cleaning cart. Her voice, soft yet unshakable, froze the entire room. What could possibly be buried in that contract? Why were the men in suits suddenly shifting in their chairs, beads of sweat glistening under the boardroom lights? And how did a janitor's daughter become the one person standing between a powerful empire and total collapse? Stick around, because by the time this story ends, you might believe in quiet heroes, too. Mark Calloway had built a career most lawyers only dream of. The Loop's golden boy of the legal scene. Sharp suits, sharper instincts, and a reputation forged in precision and loyalty. But the day he almost signed away everything he owned, he didn't feel powerful at all. He felt sure of himself, and that blind confidence nearly destroyed him. It all started in a penthouse conference room with floor-to-ceiling views of the New York skyline. Morning sunlight spilled across a marble table polished to a mirror shine. The air was still, heavy, the kind of silence that clings when something monumental is about to happen. Mark sat at the head of the table, fingertips resting on a thick folder of documents printed entirely in German. He wasn't fluent, not even close. Born and raised in Colorado, his German was limited to a few polite greetings and the kind of phrases you use ordering a beer on vacation. But legal German? That was a whole different animal. Still, he trusted the deal. Trusted the two silver-haired executives across from him, their smiles cool and unreadable. Their pens hovered, ready for his signature. "Just sign here," one said, his voice smooth and rehearsed, like a man who could sell water in a rainstorm. Standard terms. Nothing unusual. Mark flipped through the stack anyway. His eyes moved, but the words didn't land. The pages blurred into endless blocks of foreign text, clauses layered on clauses, bolded terms scattered like breadcrumbs. Deep down, he knew he was leaning more on gut feeling than actual understanding. Then, from the farthest corner of the room, a small voice cut through the stillness. "That paper doesn't say what you think it does." Every head in the room swiveled toward the sound. By the glass wall, next to a battered cleaning cart, stood a small girl, maybe 10 years old at most. Faded jeans, sneakers with laces fraying at the ends, and a gaze far too serious for someone her age. Her name was Sophie, the janitor's daughter, quietly waiting for her mother to finish mopping the hallway outside. Mark blinked, not sure he'd heard right. "Excuse me." Sophie stepped forward, clutching a worn-out notebook to her chest like it was a shield. "I read it," she said plainly. "I was bored, so I looked at the German." She hesitated, then added, "The clause on page 14 says you're giving up all property rights in Colorado forever. No right to ever take them back." The older executive chuckled under his breath. "Really? We're taking legal advice from a child now?" But the other man leaned in, beads of sweat starting to collect at his hairline. "Mark, she must be mistaken." Yet something deep in Mark's gut twisted hard. "Show me," he said. Sophie walked right up to the conference table, her small frame steady. She pressed her finger to the exact spot in the contract and began to read in slow, deliberate English. Each word hit like a gavel. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Mark stared down at the page. There it was, black and white, impossible to ignore. He looked up at the two men who, just moments ago, were all charm and easy smiles. Now their faces were tight, their mouths clamped shut. "You knew I couldn't read this," Mark said quietly. "And you didn't tell me." "It's a drafting error," one of them muttered. "An oversight. Easy to fix." But Mark wasn't listening anymore. He was somewhere else entirely, back in rural Colorado, watching his father stand helplessly in front of a deed he didn't understand, losing the family farm he'd worked his whole life for. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Just then, Sophie's mother burst into the room, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, sir. Sophie wasn't supposed to be." Mark pushed back his chair, the scrape loud against the marble floor. "She didn't interrupt," he said firmly. "She protected me." The suits exchanged a glance. The younger one tried to regain his composure. "Look, we can renegotiate. Fix the terms. If you sign now, we'll make the corrections later." Mark's jaw tightened. "Later," he repeated. "After I've handed you everything? Tell me, how many people have you pulled this on? How many contracts have you buried like this?" The room went dead quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioner suddenly felt loud, filling the silence no one dared to break. Sophie didn't so much as blink. She'd grown up in places like this, long hallways, glass walls, and polished tables she was never supposed to touch. While her mother scrubbed conference rooms, Sophie sat quietly in the corners, reading stray papers, studying signs, eavesdropping on meetings no one thought she could follow. But she could. She always could. Mark drifted toward the window, staring out at the sprawl of the city, a city that had made him, but also worn him down to the bone. He thought of the fights he'd had to win just to be taken seriously. The years spent earning trust, earning respect, building a shield around himself. And now this. He turned back toward the men at the table. You took advantage of my trust, of the one weakness you knew I had. A language I never thought I'd need to master until right now. And you would have let me walk straight into my own ruin. The older executive's patience cracked. You're really going to let a kid blow up this deal? Do you have any idea what it's worth? Mark didn't blink. That's just it, he said evenly. She's not a kid to me anymore. She's the only person in this room who's told me the Thalen. And with that, the entire balance in the room shifted. A strange stillness settled in. Mark could feel every gaze pressing on him. Some shocked, some hostile, most simply baffled. Sophie stepped up beside him, her small fists clenched at her sides like she was bracing for someone to scold her, to tell her she'd overstepped. But no one said a word. Finally, the younger executive broke the silence, his voice slicing through the tension. You know what this means, Mark? You walk away now and your project dies. We are your funding. You said it yourself last week. Without us, there's no expansion, no product launch, no Pacific Northwest offices. Mark's eyes locked on him, steady as stone. That was before I realized who I was dealing with. The older executive slammed his palm against the table. You're overreacting. It's a typo, an unfortunate translation error. We'll fix it. Let's not let a little girl's misunderstanding kill months of work. But Mark was already tuning them out. He turned toward the door, pulling out his phone. Linda, he said, his voice calm but unyielding. Get me a certified legal translator. I want someone here within the hour. The executives traded uneasy glances before one finally spoke. You're really going to humiliate us like this? Mark didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at Sophie, who now stood beside her mother, holding her hand. I need her to stay, he said quietly. She caught something no one else did, and that matters. Sophie's mother blinked in disbelief. But she's exactly who I need right now, Mark cut in. The next few minutes dragged under a heavy silence. The two executives began whispering to each other in German, their voices low and tense. Every so often, their eyes darted toward Mark, as if trying to gauge how much damage had already been done. At one point, the older one casually tried sliding the contract into a pile of unrelated paperwork, as though burying it would erase what had happened. But Mark saw it, and he was no longer the man who had walked into this room assuming every smile in a tailored suit meant trust. He pulled the contract from the stack, set it squarely back on the table, and walked to the window. There he waited, silent, until the translator arrived. Her name was Helen, a woman in her 60s with a face carved by decades of experience and gray hair pulled into a neat low bun. She carried herself with a quiet authority that settled over the room the moment she stepped inside. Her eyes briefly met Sophie's, and she gave the girl a subtle nod before taking the contract in hand. She began reading in silence, her gaze moving steadily down the pages. Halfway through, her brow furrowed. 15 minutes later, she looked up, and her verdict landed like a hammer. This is no typo. This is a full and deliberate transfer of assets, irrevocable, binding, and locked under a jurisdictional clause that makes it impossible to challenge in an American court. Whoever signs this hands over everything, with no legal way to take it back. Mark's chest tightened. He turned to face the executives. You were going to let me sign this, he said, voice taut. You let me sit here in good faith, ready to hand over my entire company. The older man leaned forward, his tone dripping with condescension. And in return, you'd have gained full access to the European market. You think people get ahead in this business by being soft? Mark's reply came so low it was almost a whisper. This isn't weakness, Mark said evenly. It's called integrity. You should try it sometime. The younger executive scoffed. Integrity? You'll be finished in 6 months. Mark's mouth curved into a dry smile. Maybe, but at least I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror. The tension in the room thickened, voices beginning to rise. That's when Helen stepped closer, her presence steady, and placed a gentle hand on Mark's arm. My husband lost everything to a contract just like this, she said softly. I watched him work himself to the bone, trying to rebuild from nothing. Don't let them do this to you. You're not alone. Those words hit something deep inside him. Mark had always been the strong one, the one people leaned on, the one expected to have the answers, to make the hard calls. But in that moment, he realized even the strongest need someone to stand beside them when it matters most. And today, that someone hadn't been him. It had been a little girl with curious eyes and a spine made of steel. He drew in a deep breath, then faced the table. This contract is null, as of right now. And if you try to push it any further, I'll send it to the State Bar and every major newspaper from Seattle to Portland. You won't be able to sit at a single corporate table without someone bringing this up. The executive stiffened. You wouldn't, one hissed. I already have, Mark replied, his tone like ice. You should be more worried about the fallout. I'm not signing a thing, and I'll make sure no one else ever does either. At that moment, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, an incoming call from the director of an investment firm out of Oregon. He barely remembered meeting them, just a brief conversation at a business forum months earlier. He answered, and the voice on the other end wasted no time. We've been watching. We heard the meeting, took a turn. We're interested in your project, and we don't hide clauses in foreign languages. If you're ready for ethical capital, we're ready to move. When the call ended, Mark just stood there, stunned. Everything had shifted. Not just the deal, not just the balance of power in that room, but something inside him. His gaze moved to Sophie, now half hiding behind her mother's coat. You saved me, he told her simply. Sophie's smile was small, shy, but there was pride in it. In the days that followed, words spread like wildfire. And it wasn't about Mark. It wasn't even about the deal that had collapsed. It was about her. Sophie, the janitor's daughter who spotted the trap no one else saw. The little girl who read a German contract and stopped a multi-million-dollar fraud dead in its tracks. Local news ran the story first, then regional, then national. Before long, international headlines were calling her the girl who caught the lie. One paper ran it with the title, The Small Voice That Spoke Thalen. The fallout was swift. The executives were dragged into an internal investigation. One resigned, the other was suspended. As for Mark, he began receiving invitations to speak at law schools and business ethics panels across the country. And every single time he told the story, he made one thing clear. The hero wasn't me. It was a child no one saw coming. He offered Sophie's mother a better job, more pay, better hours, and the respect she'd always deserved. But that still didn't feel like enough. So he went further. He personally arranged a full-ride scholarship for Sophie, covering languages, law, whatever she wanted to study. You've got a gift, he told her. And the world needs more people like you reading the fine print. Sophie didn't say much. She just nodded, then wrapped her arms around her mother. And for the first time in a very long time, Mark Calloway felt something had truly gone right. Not for the company, not for profit margins, but for the soul. Months rolled by. The city moved on the way New York always did. Taxis honking, deals closing, windows lighting up across office towers like little promises to tomorrow. But Mark Calloway wasn't the same man who had once sat in that pristine glass conference room, pen in hand, ready to sign away everything he had built, without even knowing it. The backlash against the attempted scam was brutal. The executives who had tried to trap him saw their reputations crumble to dust. One stepped down before formal charges could land. The other was quietly removed from the board and vanished from public life. Some associates who had once called Mark naive now called him brave. Those who had mocked his obsession with transparency started rethinking the way they did business. And Mark? He never sought revenge. Mark's focus shifted. This time, he wasn't just rebuilding his company. He was rebuilding his values. The new investment from the Oregon-based ethical fund brought more than money. It brought clarity. Every meeting was now held in plain English. Every contract went through multilingual review teams. And every decision passed through a single filter. Are we proud of this? But the real transformation didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in Mark's heart. Every Friday afternoon, he made time to visit a small neighborhood school tucked between two aging brownstones in Capitol Hill, the same school where Sophie had started her scholarship program. She'd chosen to study law and languages, moving at a pace that left even her teachers astonished. While the other kids played tag in the schoolyard, Sophie could usually be found in the library, surrounded by books on contract law, ethics, and translation. One afternoon, Mark dropped by unannounced and caught her mid-debate with two older students about the Zurich conventions. She spotted him, grinning wide. You said I had a gift, she reminded him. He smiled back. I didn't think I was right. I knew it. Her mother had flourished too. In her new role as Mark's executive office coordinator, she was no longer scrubbing floors. She was managing schedules, welcoming international clients, and reminding the legal team that sometimes the sharpest mind in the room isn't the loudest one. Sophie and her mom had become more than employees. They were family. They shared holidays, birthday cakes, quiet dinners after long workdays. Mark, who had once eaten alone in upscale the Loop steakhouses, now found himself passing bowls of mashed potatoes around a modest kitchen table, with two people who reminded him what integrity looked like in the everyday moments. But real change, the kind that lasts, goes deeper than contracts or headlines. It settles into your habits, your choices, your instincts. Mark no longer walked into a room assuming he was the smartest. He listened more. He slowed down. And when the stakes were high, he asked every question twice. Mark made sure that from then on, translators were always present in any international meeting. And he made sure that anyone who worked under his name, no matter their title or position, was treated with dignity and respect. The media kept trying to make him the hero of the story. Headlines called him the honest lawyer who stood up to fraud. But every time, he corrected them. I wasn't the hero, he'd say. Sophie was. I was just the man lucky enough to listen. Years later, Mark found himself standing on a stage in Zurich, addressing a packed audience at a global ethics conference. The crowd was a mix of CEOs, policymakers, and law students from across the world. He told the story again, about the contract, the high-rise conference room, the way the air shifted after Sophie spoke, about the betrayal he had been seconds away from signing his name to, and the small voice that stopped him. He paused before the next part. There's a moment in every person's life, he said, when you're faced with something that looks perfectly normal on the surface, a contract, a promise, a partnership, and something deep inside you whispers, something's not right. Most of us ignore that voice. We trust the suits. We sign, and we lose. He let that hang in the air for a beat. I almost lost everything. But a 10-year-old girl, with nothing to gain and everything to risk, spoke up. And it changed my life. If you're listening right now, it might change yours, too. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was thoughtful, sincere, the kind of clapping that comes from people who have truly been changed. That night, Mark picked up the phone and called Sophie, now 16 and preparing for college. She answered with a sleepy laugh. You know it's 3 a.m. here, right? I know, he said. Just wanted to say thank you again. You already did about 1,000 times. Still not enough. She yawned. Did you tell the story again? I did. And did you cry again, just a little? They both laughed. Then Sophie said quietly, You know, I used to think it was just luck that I happened to be there that day, that I happened to understand German. But now, I think maybe I was supposed to be there. Mark nodded, even though she couldn't see it. You were? Mark asked softly. And just before they hung up, Sophie added, You're going to keep telling the story, right? Every time they let you. There was a beat of silence. Then a quiet, good night. The line went dead, and Mark lay back in his hotel room, phone resting on his chest. He thought about how easily everything could have gone the other way. A single mark. One moment of silence instead of courage. One voice overlooked. That's the thing about failing. It doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes, it walks into the room wearing scuffed sneakers and carrying a worn notebook. And now that you've heard the whole story, I want to ask you something. Do you believe a single voice, no matter how small, can change the course of someone's life? Would you have listened? Or would you have signed and walked away like nothing was wrong? Tell me in the comments, yes or no. If this story meant something to you, type the number 100 so I know you stayed until the end. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Let's remind the world. Sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one no one was paying attention to.